This is what the Oblivion Remaster looks like, completely maxed out at 4K, including the hardware-based ray tracing, the Lumen, all of that. This is native 4K, no upscaling, and it can look really great, especially compared to the original. Now, they're achieving this by wrapping the original game engine, probably with some modern updates to it, within an Unreal Engine 5 graphics layer. So the game logic itself isn't running in Unreal Engine 5, but the graphics layer is. Now, honestly, like I said, a lot of this looks really good. Now, one thing I did notice is on reflections. Notice the screen space artifacting we get off of these. This looks a little bit odd due to a lot of the reflections coming from screen space, which is unfortunate because this is the hardware-based Lumen, but it's just still relying on a lot of screen space information, so that doesn't completely take care of everything. So this is the hardware-based Lumen RT turned on. But, you know, overall, the graphics look pretty good, despite some nitpicks. Anyway, how is the performance, though, considering this is an Unreal Engine 5 wrapper? Well, right now, this is an RTX 5090, so we would certainly hope performance is good. And actually, let's talk about that for a second, because I don't know if I'll be able to get it to trigger if I maybe run off in a direction I haven't. Although on that fast camera pan, did you see the little bit of a frame time spike right there? It's kind of about to trail off the graph here. By the way, important to note, because I'm not capturing at a locked 60 FPS and you're watching a locked 60 FPS YouTube video, do not judge the smoothness by the actual smoothness you're seeing. That's not what I'm seeing in person on a variable refresh rate display. What you should be watching is the frame time graph. Smooth frame time graph means there's no stutters. But if I swing the camera quickly, you'll notice I'm getting some stutters to appear on that frame time graph, and we can also get the 1% lows to be impacted a little bit as well. I've noticed, especially if I run off in directions I haven't seen before, I do get some frame time spikes. In other words, what I'm trying to say here is the Unreal Engine 5 stuttering, which is likely shader compilation here, although there can be other issues involved as well, is not a completely solved problem in this game. I've also noticed less stutters when I run through an area the second time, which indicates that some of it is shader compilation related, although possibly not all of it. Now, this is also the case that the game does have a shader pre-compilation step, so this certainly could be much worse. And again, it's also possible that I'm misdiagnosing the shader compilation. But this is what things look like, completely maxed out on the 5090 at 4K. There's a little bit of stuttering. You just notice some shadows kind of load in there as I pop in and out. I was hoping, do you see that? I was hoping with Unreal Engine 5's Nanite that we wouldn't get pop-in. But again, notice that right now you don't see all the stuff on this hill. And as I walk forward, things pop in underneath. I don't know if that's like a lack of nanite being applied to those, or maybe because of the game engine underneath this. You know, Unreal Engine 5 is like a graphics layer on top of the older engine. Maybe the older engine has certain draw limits or something like that. But yeah, there is definitely still some pop-in noticeable. But again, overall, the graphics do look significantly better than the original game, which is nice to see. Now, it looks like the open world is more demanding than dungeons and in more city-related areas. If we go ahead and run into the city, we can kind of compare. Now, guys, it has been so long since I played Oblivion. Now, the Elder Scrolls games, one of my favorite series of games. I mean, Morrowind's always my personal favorite. I'm a little scared to go back to it. I hope it would hold up, maybe with the modern coat of paint like this. But that was my introduction into Elder Scrolls. Oblivion I liked. It just never quite had that special feeling like Morrowind did for me. I'm gonna go ahead and reset the frame rate counter because you can see as we entered this environment, there was a little bit of stuttering. Now that we're in it, things seem to be slowed, you know, a little running a bit smoother here. But I was gonna say, I remember the city being really big, but since the individual areas are kind of sectioned off through loading screens, it doesn't look like we're running into some of the issues you get in Unreal Engine 5 games where you're in a massive city environment with tons of NPCs all at the same time, and everything kind of bogs down on the CPU. Because I think it helps that it's sectioned off into these smaller zones. So it does look like the open world, at least in my testing so far, is the more demanding area of the game. Now that being said, so far I've been running this at completely native 4K. Again, we're on a 5090 though. I'm gonna test out some lower end GPUs before we're done here to make sure we see how this performs on more realistic hardware. But again, I thought it'd be neat to show it off in its max settings and glory at the start of the video. But again, we could kick on upscaling even DLSS Quality. Does have frame generation support, by the way, also has FSR and XeSS support, which is nice. But if we even kick on DLSS Quality here, we will notice that performance does increase very noticeably. This tends to be the case in Unreal Engine 5, where a lot of stuff scales very heavily with resolution, and so we can increase performance quite a bit by doing that. I'm actually curious if we go all the way down to performance mode upscaling to ease the burden on the GPU, wrong buttons there, if I will be able to see any kind of maybe CPU limitation here, although again, it is on a 9800X3D. And while it actually kind of seems like we might be seeing that, or maybe some kind of underlying engine issue, remember this is built on a very old engine, but do you see that my GPU is now not pegged near 100% utilization? So on a 9800X3D CPU, which is very fast and underlying fast platform, it looks like we're capping out at about 130 or so FPS in this city environment. I'm curious if we step outside, if we'll be able to get that higher. I'm also curious if turning off the hardware-based Lumen would have any relief to that situation. Looking like out here, GPU utilization is still not exactly at 100%. So yeah, it does seem like it's not just a GPU limited situation here. Again, by going down to performance mode, not scaling higher than that. So that is interesting. Like I said, I'm curious if the hardware-based Lumen is having some impact on that. I'm actually not sure if I can toggle this setting while in game. Let's go ahead and try it out and see if it worked. Well, performance is noticeably different now, so that does indeed seem to be the case. Performance does go higher here, and it appears like the GPU utilization overall is a bit higher too. So potentially helping things out a little bit there. So yeah, certainly looks like turning off the hardware-based Lumen is improving performance noticeably, especially on like the underlying system. I think there's more maybe BVH calculations or something like that going on with the CPU side of things when you have the hardware-based Lumen. Now, do we want to go ahead and put in something a bit more reasonable like an RTX 3060 and see how that fares? I think that would make sense. We're on the RTX 3060 now. This is 1080p resolution. This is ultra settings, although it does have, I did turn the hardware-based Lumen off. But again, this is the ultra preset other than that. So hardware-based RT off. Other than that, ultra settings, although Lumen software RT quality is set to low. And I've also set to TAA rather than TSR because that gives us back a little bit of performance. Because quite frankly, this is pretty demanding. So 30 FPS at 1080p Ultra, again, even with some compromises already to things like the hardware-based Lumen. So pretty demanding, only around 30 FPS here. Now, obviously though, you don't have to play a game at Ultra settings. So before we scream unoptimized, let's go ahead and at least give it a chance. So let's turn down to high settings and see what happens. So going down to high settings, looks like it stayed at native resolution. That's good. Let's confirm. Okay, massive, massive difference between ultra settings and high settings for performance. Looks like that got us all the way up into the mid 50s, and things still look quite close to their ultra counterparts, even if it's not exactly the same. So if you're on a variable refresh rate display, this could certainly be passable in a fairly slow-paced single-player RPG type situation. Curious as I wander around if we're going to see any performance blips or anything, stutters, anything like that. A little bit of a stutter right there. Okay, you know what? I'm curious. Are those stutters happening when objects load in the distance? Remember how I was saying that there's a distance at which things pop in and out of existence? I think that might be triggering with these frame time blips. Let's see if we can get it to happen again. Okay, Or am I already close enough that the objects are loaded in? I think I was already close enough that the objects are loaded in. I'm getting distracted here, but I think that's actually what it is. I don't think it's actually the shader compilation, although of course there could be some of that. Wonder if when things load out, when I get, yeah, I think it transitioned right there. Do you guys see the bit of a blip on the frame time graph? And now when I run back forward over that same transition, there's a blip again as things load in. So yeah, it seems to be that transition as more stuff loads in the distance is actually causing those frame time blips. Really interesting. Anyway, so we're in kind of the mid 50s, like I said, at these high settings at 1080p. I am curious if we went ahead and went down lower, what would happen though? So let's go down to medium settings at 1080p. And again, make sure it's not adjusting our resolution. A lot of games like to do that. And it looks like we are getting a lot more performance back. So we're now up well over 60 FPS now, although of course there can be issues with the 1% lows, especially in Unreal Engine 5, and especially as things kind of load in those weird blips. But yeah, it looks like certainly if you want to play at 1080p medium settings, the 3060 is going to be pretty good here in this open world area. All right, so overall, I would say that seems fine. Maybe for the sake of completion, let's go ahead and check out what low settings look like and perform like before we try out 1440p resolution, probably with upscaling on the RTX 3060. Wow, the lighting certainly seems to have changed quite a bit. I'm seeing a lot more shimmer on everything. So low settings, turning everything to low certainly turns some things down. Wow, okay, you can see the grass popping in much closer to the screen as well. So low settings are certainly letting you turn some things down. It's very noticeable, but this is also boosting performance pretty considerably. But yeah, seems like you're gonna see things popping in much closer to the screen, including the grass and all that. Yeah, so it is what it is. It does get you a lot more performance. It's seeming like on the 3060, you'd probably want to be on the high settings or medium settings, or probably an optimized mix between the two. That's a little beyond the scope of the video. Let's go ahead and pop up to 1440p resolution though, and go ahead and see how that looks. So 1440p resolution, let's make sure that's actually applied. And it looks like at low settings, we are getting reasonable performance at 1440p, but again, those low settings are making a lot of compromises. So let's go ahead and turn some things up. Yeah, that bush pops in real close to the screen, doesn't it? Yeah, right there, look at that. That's really distracting. Those low settings. Okay, anyway, it does get you a lot of performance back though, so there's that. Let's go up to medium settings and see how things roll. So medium settings, you can see the massive lighting change there. So the global illumination definitely very different at medium compared to low. Now we're into kind of those 50s, low 50s. The 1% lows are kind of in the 40s. But hey, look, that bush isn't popping in so close to the screen anymore though. So at least we have that, and my athletics increased. That's good. Anyway, I'm excited to actually play this game a bit more once I've got the video out of the way. This so much nostalgia for me right now, man. Anyway, let's go ahead and look at what if we're at medium settings, but we kick on DLSS quality. So if you're on a card like the RTX 3060, I think it absolutely makes sense if you're on a 1440p monitor to be at least at DLSS quality. Wait a minute, I'm confused. I swear I just kicked on DLSS quality and did performance not actually increase? Kind of in the mid 50s still? What is going on here? Was this actually upscaling before without like the graphic settings having told it to? Let's go upscaling off again. Confirm. Upscaling off. We're at around 55 FPS. Okay. DLSS on, quality settings, confirm. We're now at 56 FPS. That doesn't seem right. But hey, it is what it is. Let's go more aggressive just to make sure DLSS is applying at all. If we go to DLSS performance mode, are we getting anything here? Okay, so DLSS Performance mode is getting us to 60, mid-60s. So DLSS is working. It's just for some reason it seems like the native TAA with upscaling off seem to be having the same performance. Let's kick this off again. Is there a bug going on here? No, that's back to the mid-50s. So I was wondering if somehow the upscaling resolution scaling was applying even though we turned upscaling off. But no, it just seems like DLSS Quality was performing about the same as the native TAA. It's kind of strange. That's not usually how things go, but that seems to be what we're seeing here. Now, I'm curious if DLSS Balanced would be a good way to get to around 60 FPS at these settings. So it is looking like, again, not that you're never going to blip below 60 FPS, but it's looking like 1440p DLSS Balanced at the medium settings is probably a reasonable way to play this game on a 1440p display on a card like the RTX 3060. I do want to check out the higher graphics settings just to see how it goes. Again, we're on DLSS Balanced, so that's giving us a fighting chance. It looks like high settings are taking us down to the upper 40s, low 50s or so. So again, if you're on a variable refresh rate display in a single player game to get the increased visuals, might be a reasonable trade-off. And of course, we can push up all the way to ultra settings just to see how that goes. But given how demanding they were on 1080p, I'm guessing 1440p is going to be a bit rough as well. Yeah, so the ultra settings in this game are just incredibly taxing. We're dropping to, wow, looks like below 30 at times. Although usually more in the mid-30s. So yeah, it's really looking like one of the games where you want to stay away from the Ultra preset unless you have incredibly powerful hardware. If you're on anything like a 3060, the Ultra settings seem to be something to avoid. High settings seem to get you a lot of the visuals for a lot better performance. Let's check out an AMD GPU before we go. Maybe the 9070 XT, since that's a pretty interesting new one. All right, we've switched to the RX 9070 XT from AMD, and the current graphics settings are 1440p, and I have it at ultra settings, and I have once again actually turned on the hardware-based Lumen to see how the RT performance goes here. We might also try turning it off. And again, we're starting out at a native TAA, but we might also look at some upscaling here as well. So let's go ahead and start with that. It's looking like at a ultra settings with RT enabled 1440p, and we saw how demanding the ultra settings were when we tried them on the RTX 3060. We are apparently getting, let me reset the averages here. It looks like we're getting kind of in the 70 FPS range. Now again, there are blips on the frame time graph, this being the first time we've loaded it up on this GPU. Like I said, I think there's small blips of shader compilation, and I think the more regular stutters can be as it loads things in and out in the distance once we pass a certain distance from those objects. But yeah, looking like ultra settings at 1440p native resolution, even with the hardware-based RT set to ultra, is going pretty well on the 9070 XT. This is certainly very playable for a single-player game. Now, of course, we can adjust settings from here. So let's go ahead and play around with that a little bit. So obviously, one option would be turning down graphics settings. One option there is the hardware-based RT, so I am curious if that makes a major performance difference here. It does look like that made a pretty big difference. So we're up, looks like noticeably higher frame rates, although as we run around, we are still dipping into the 70s. It looks like more frequently in the 80s to 90s. So definitely a noticeable difference there with the hardware RT on versus off. So that's one place we can make a change. And now I'm also curious about upscaling here. Of course, there is TSR available, but I'm looking at FSR. Now, FSR, it's not mentioning FSR4, it's specifically saying FSR3. So I'm curious if the driver toggle would be available. I don't think it would be. Why is my driver software not popping up? Sometimes it's a little bit slow to pop up. Anyway, looks like FSR 4 is not the default available in the game. Again, there's always mods like Optiscaler and things like that to try to play around with that a bit. Let's go with FSR 3 quality to start things out with here. Oh, there's my my overlay finally popped up. All right, let's go ahead and see about the gaming tab and if we get an FSR 4 button. Does not appear to be an FSR 4 button here, so there is no official FSR 4 support at launch, it appears, which is not surprising, but would have been cool. Anyway, so there's that with the FSR quality. Now, I am curious, like I said, if we just went down to high settings at native resolution, how much of a performance boost we would get out of that. So let's just go down to high settings. And if it's anything like what we saw in our 3060, things are going to be much, much better here. All right, so yeah, that's looking like much closer to that 100-ish FPS, where a lot of people are feeling, 90 to 100 FPS feels a lot more responsive. As high refresh rate as you'd really need in a single-player game, looks and feels pretty good. So there's that. Looking like performance is pretty good at 1440p. Variety of options to increase performance. What if we wanted to play at 4K resolution, though? So let's try that out before we go. So 4K resolution, again, we are at high settings with the hardware Lumen turned off, so it's software Lumen, and we're using native TAA. So it's looking like that gets us into kind of the mid-50s. So native 4K high, mid-50s, that's certainly not awful or anything. And of course, either turning down settings further or upscaling. Upscaling at 4K often makes a lot of sense, even using FSR. Again, it would be nice to see if maybe Optiscaler or something like that could mod FSR 4 into the game. But it's looking like even FSR 3 quality, which again at a 4K output generally has enough pixels to look reasonable. Looks like there's a bit of ghosting trail behind that post and stuff in motion. But hey, nothing too terrible or anything. And it's looking like performance is up in the mid-70s or so, kind of running around this area. All right, so that is our quick look at the performance on a variety of systems here. I wish I had time to pull out my lower-end CPU-based systems to see how CPU scaling works. To be honest, I just don't have time today. This game got shadow dropped, and my schedule does not work with getting multiple systems up and running to get you a video on day one. Another final thought I have is actually I'm curious how mod support is going to go for this, because as we know for Elder Scrolls games, mod support can be a major factor. And then the other question I have is, not only could they do this with other games, like Skyrim, for example, or even go all the way back to Morrowind or something like that, and put this Unreal Engine 5 wrapper around it, I'm also curious just like if they have interest in, like, is their engine that they used in... Because they keep updating this engine. So when they did Starfield, they did update the graphics pretty significantly. But let's face it, the graphics weren't exactly Unreal Engine 5 level. Not that I'm saying Unreal Engine 5 is my favorite thing of all time, but I wonder if they're maybe considering this as an option for future Elder Scrolls games to keep their underlying logic and mods and things and the way they build the game in an updated version of their creation engine, but wrapping a more advanced graphics layer around it. It's certainly an interesting approach, and I'm just curious on what that could potentially mean. Now, maybe it doesn't mean anything. Maybe that's just what they chose to do for this project, and maybe it will not be revisited or reused for any other project. But it's certainly cool to play Oblivion in the updated graphics here. I have a feeling I'll be playing this quite a bit. For nostalgia's sake, hopefully the game holds up. I'm certainly enjoying the first tutorial section, but we'll have to see how it goes. I've got lots of questions about how they updated the gameplay. I'm curious if the world leveling, not the player leveling, they mentioned some updates to player leveling. as kind of a combination between Oblivion and Skyrim. I'm curious how that goes, but I'm also curious about the world leveling system, because that was one of the things I didn't like about the original Oblivion, especially coming after Morrowind. But I'm going to go ahead and shut up because my channel is more about performance than thoughts on the game's gameplay and game systems themselves. I hope all of you have an excellent day.